At 5 today, a lawsuit filed by 4 reality show sisters against the city of Springdale and Washington County will proceed.
The lawsuit says officials released details of a case involving Joshua Duggar.
TLC didn't cancel counting on just because of ratings. It was the lawsuits that changed everything. Behind the wholesome facade of the Duggar empire, a storm of legal battles was quietly brewing. From shocking family disputes to financial controversies, these cases exposed cracks the network could no longer ignore. Here's the truth about the lawsuits that pushed TLC to pull the plug. The darkest chapter in the Duggar family's history began long before the family became household names on TLC. According to later police documents and family statements, the abuse involved inappropriate touching while the girls were asleep or otherwise vulnerable. At the time, the incidents were kept within the family and never reported to law enforcement. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, the parents, later admitted they handled the matter internally, relying on private discipline and the involvement of close family friends, including Bobby and Jim Holt, instead of contacting authorities. This decision to keep the abuse hidden would have long-lasting repercussions. For several years, the issue remained unreported, and Josh continued living at home. The Duggars would later claim that they believed their private discipline, coupled with Josh's expressions of remorse and counseling through religious mentors, was sufficient. But the silence would eventually be broken in a way the family did not anticipate. In December 2006, several years after the initial abuse, the Duggar family had gained some regional attention through media appearances and were preparing for what would become their national reality TV platform. Around this time, an anonymous tip, reportedly connected to someone aware of the family's Oprah Winfrey Show taping with Harpo Studios, reached the Arkansas Department of Human Services, DHS, hotline. The tip alleged that Josh had molested younger children in the home. Harpo Studios itself also forwarded a similar warning to authorities. This triggered an official investigation by the Springdale Police Department and Washington County authorities. On December 12, 2006, investigators arranged for the Duggar children to be interviewed at the Children's Safety Center in Springdale, Arkansas. The interviews provided confirmation of what had happened years earlier. Several of Josh's sisters disclosed that they had been touched inappropriately by their older brother when they were much younger. Josh himself admitted some wrongdoing during these inquiries. With this information, a family in need of services FENS petition was filed in Washington County Juvenile Court in January 2007. This type of petition was not a criminal charge, but rather a family court mechanism used in cases where intervention was considered necessary to ensure children's safety and welfare. Despite the troubling revelations, no criminal charges were filed against Josh Duggar. Because the incidents had occurred years earlier and the statute of limitations had largely expired by the time authorities became formally involved, prosecutors determined they could not move forward with charges. The children remained in the Duggar home under their parents' care, and the case was ultimately closed without further court-ordered consequences for Josh. This initial handling of the allegations remained out of the public eye for nearly a decade. However, the police and juvenile court records from the 2006-2007 investigation did not disappear. In later years, as the Duggar family gained national fame on TLC's 19 Kids and Counting, those same records resurfaced and became central to both media exposés and civil litigation. When the allegations became public in 2015, they sparked national outrage, not only over Josh's actions as a teenager, but also over the Duggar parents' decision to keep the abuse secret and continue promoting their family as paragons of conservative Christian values. In the wake of Josh Duggar's highly publicized fall from grace in 2015, one of the most sensational legal developments came when adult performer Danica Dylan filed a civil lawsuit against him. The lawsuit, filed in late 2015, alleged that Duggar had violently assaulted her during a sexual encounter in 2014. Long before his public scandals had exploded, but around the time he was maintaining his image as a devout husband and father on TLC's 19 Kids and Counting. Dylan, a well-known figure in the adult entertainment industry, claimed that her encounter with Duggar had gone far beyond what she had consented to. According to her court filings, Duggar allegedly became aggressive and physically abusive, leaving her feeling traumatized and violated. She pursued the case not as a criminal complaint, but as a civil battery lawsuit, seeking damages for what she described as emotional and physical harm. The timing of Dylan's lawsuit was especially devastating for Josh Duggar's already battered reputation. Just months earlier, he had been exposed for using the extramarital affair website Ashley Madison, a revelation that shattered his carefully crafted image as a faithful Christian family man. Coupled with the resurfacing of his past molestation scandals from his teenage years, Dylan's claims painted a picture of Duggar as someone living a double life of secrecy, hypocrisy, and abusive behavior. From the outset, Duggar's legal team fought aggressively to have the case dismissed. His attorneys filed motions in federal court arguing that Dylan's claims lacked sufficient evidence and were designed to exploit Duggar's notoriety. They characterized the lawsuit as opportunistic and sensational, pointing out that Dylan had spoken publicly about Duggar in interviews around the time of the filing, which they claimed undermined her credibility. Duggar's camp argued that the lawsuit should not move forward, framing it as an attempt to gain publicity and financial settlement from a scandal-ridden reality TV figure. Despite these motions, the case did initially proceed through standard litigation filings in late 2015. Both sides exchanged paperwork, and the case received national media coverage. For many observers, Dylan's lawsuit symbolized the collapse of the Duggar family's pristine reputation. Once marketed as an emblem of conservative Christian values and large family purity, the Duggars were now embroiled in salacious lawsuits and front-page tabloid scandals. However, the case did not culminate in a trial or public airing of evidence. By early 2016, court records indicate that both parties had reached an agreement to end the litigation. On February 11, 2016, a federal judge ordered the case dismissed. Importantly, this dismissal did not constitute a legal determination of guilt or innocence. Rather, it reflected a voluntary resolution between the two sides, likely a settlement, though details were never publicly disclosed. The court's dismissal order made clear that the litigation was concluded by agreement, not by a verdict. Local Arkansas reporting at the time noted that Duggar's attorneys had pushed for dismissal from the very beginning and that the eventual dismissal aligned with their legal strategy. National outlets highlighted that, unlike a criminal trial, a civil case could be withdrawn or settled without public disclosure of the underlying facts. This meant that the public would never learn the precise details of what transpired between Duggar and Dylan. For Dylan, who had publicly shared her allegations and described the trauma she claimed to have suffered, the dismissal ended her pursuit of damages in court. For Duggar, it meant one less legal battle to fight as he retreated from the public eye to undergo what his family described as rehabilitation and counseling. The broader impact of the Dylan lawsuit went beyond the courtroom. It fueled the narrative that Josh Duggar had been living a secretive, destructive lifestyle that stood in stark contrast to the public image he had built as a devoted Christian husband and father. Even though the lawsuit was dismissed without a ruling against him, the mere existence of the allegations further damaged his reputation and made it impossible for TLC to salvage 19 kids and counting, or for Duggar to return to public life. In May 2017, Jill Dillard, Jessa Seawald, Jinger Vuolo, and Joy Anna Forsyth filed a federal lawsuit against the city of Springdale, Washington County, and several individual officials. The suit alleged multiple torts: invasion of privacy, public disclosure of private facts, intrusion upon seclusion, and outrage. Their claim rested on the argument that the way the police and county handled the 2015 FOIA requests directly led to the disclosure of their identities as child sexual abuse victims, information that, they contended, should have remained confidential. At the center of the lawsuit were two sets of records: the Springdale Police Department report and the Washington County Sheriff's Office incident report. Both had been created during the 2006-2007 investigation into Josh Duggar's abuse. While these reports were technically subject to Arkansas's FOIA law, the sisters argued that officials failed in their legal and ethical duty to properly protect their identities when responding to tabloid requests. The critical point was in the redactions. The Springdale Police Department's version was more heavily blacked out, while the Washington County Incident Report contained fewer redactions. The sisters claimed that even with partial redactions, the Washington County report included enough identifiers, family relationships, ages, and contextual details that the public could easily deduce their identities as victims. This, they alleged, caused them emotional harm and ongoing trauma, violating their privacy rights. According to court records, the FOIA requests that triggered the release came in May 2015, just as the Duggar family was still a major fixture on TLC's 19 Kids and Counting. An attorney working on behalf of In Touch Weekly submitted requests to both the city of Springdale and Washington County for all records connected to the 2006 molestation investigation. Officials processed the requests and, relying on Arkansas's open records law, released the documents with varying degrees of redaction. Shortly thereafter, tabloids published explosive articles detailing the long-buried abuse, sparking outrage, ending the family's television show, and irreversibly altering the Duggar sisters' lives. The litigation that followed was slow and complex. Over several years, the case wound its way through procedural motions and interlocutory appeals, with the defendants, city and county officials, arguing that they were protected by statutory and qualified immunity for disclosures made in response to FOIA. By the time the case was ready to move toward trial, only 3 tort claims remained: intrusion upon seclusion, public disclosure of private facts, and outrage. In February 2022, nearly 5 years after the lawsuit was filed, the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Arkansas issued a decisive ruling. On February 9, 2022, the court granted summary judgment in favor of the defendants. The 20-page opinion laid out several reasons for dismissal. First, the court found that the plaintiffs had not met the legal standards necessary to establish all elements of their tort claims. For example, while the sisters argued that the records disclosed intimate private facts, the court noted that those documents were law enforcement records subject to FOIA, and officials had followed statutory procedures in redacting and releasing them. Second, the court concluded that the city and county officials were entitled to statutory or qualified immunity. In other words, even if the plaintiffs suffered harm, the officials could not be held personally liable for actions taken in the scope of their duties under Arkansas's FOIA law. The opinion carefully reviewed the timeline from the original 2002-2003 abuse, the 2006-2007 police and juvenile court investigation, the 2015 FOIA requests, and the differences between the redacted reports. In the end, the court held that the sisters' claims, though serious, did not meet the threshold required for a jury trial. The dismissal meant that the Duggar sisters' attempt to hold local officials legally accountable for the disclosure of the molestation records came to an end. Unlike a jury verdict, summary judgment ended the case without trial, closing the matter in early 2022. For Jill, Jessa, Jinger, and Joy, the dismissal represented another painful chapter in a saga that had already forced them to relive childhood trauma on the national stage. The lawsuit's resolution underscored the tension between open records laws and victim privacy rights. While Arkansas's FOIA is designed to ensure government transparency, the Duggar sisters argued it had been weaponized in a way that violated their dignity and exposed them to further harm. The court's decision, however, reaffirmed that government entities cannot be easily sued for complying with FOIA, even when the fallout is personally devastating. The most consequential and final legal downfall of Josh Duggar arrived in 2021, years after the scandals of molestation allegations and civil lawsuits had already destroyed his public image. On April 29, 2021, federal agents with the Department of Homeland Security arrested Duggar in Arkansas on charges of receiving and possessing child sexual abuse material, CSM. The indictment alleged that Duggar had repeatedly downloaded and viewed images and videos of children being sexually abused, including material that federal investigators described as among the worst they had ever encountered. Duggar was arraigned in federal court and entered a plea of not guilty. While awaiting trial, he was released under strict conditions. The court ordered him to live with third-party custodians, wear an ankle monitor, and avoid unsupervised contact with minors, including his own children. He was barred from accessing the internet, and his daily movements were closely monitored. These restrictions, though unusual for someone with Duggar's high profile, reflected the gravity of the charges and the government's concern over public safety. As the case moved toward trial, the pretrial filings revealed a fierce battle over evidence. Prosecutors argued that Duggar's past conduct, including the confirmed molestation of his sisters between 2002 and 2003, was relevant to show intent, knowledge, and absence of mistake. Defense attorneys countered that dredging up prior sexual assaults would prejudice the jury and argued to exclude such evidence. Federal Judge Timothy Brooks carefully weighed these arguments in a series of rulings, setting the stage for what would be one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Arkansas in recent years. The trial began in late November 2021 in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Federal prosecutors presented forensic evidence showing that Duggar had used his car dealership's computer system to download illegal content through peer-to-peer networks. Investigators testified that the material Duggar accessed involved the abuse of very young children and was so graphic that even seasoned agents described it as some of the worst they had seen in their careers. The defense attempted to cast doubt on whether Duggar himself had been the one using the device, suggesting that others could have accessed the system. However, prosecutors highlighted digital footprints linking the downloads directly to Duggar, including timestamps that matched his personal schedule and phone activity. On December 9, 2021, after a week of testimony and evidence, a federal jury returned a guilty verdict on both counts: one count of receiving CSM and one count of possessing CSM. The verdict marked a historic moment, the first time Josh Duggar, once the polished face of TLC's 19 Kids and Counting and a spokesperson for conservative Christian organizations, was formally convicted in a court of law for sexual crimes. The sentencing hearing took place on May 25, 2022. Judge Brooks imposed a sentence of 151 months, 12 years and 7 months, in federal prison, followed by 20 years of supervised release. Duggar was also ordered to pay fines and mandatory assessments and was required to register as a sex offender. As part of his supervised release conditions, Duggar will face some of the strictest restrictions available under federal law: no unsupervised contact with minors, no use of internet-capable devices without monitoring software, and mandatory participation in sex offender treatment programs. Homeland Security officials issued public statements emphasizing the seriousness of the crimes, noting that the materials Duggar accessed represented the exploitation of some of the most vulnerable victims imaginable. The conviction and sentence did not end the legal saga. Duggar immediately appealed, challenging the admissibility of evidence and arguing that the district court had erred in its rulings. But on August 7, 2023, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the conviction. Duggar's legal team filed for rehearing and even sought an en banc review from the full appellate court, but those petitions were denied. Undeterred, Duggar petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court to hear his case. On June 24, 2024, the Supreme Court declined review, leaving the conviction intact. With that, Duggar's last formal avenue for appeal closed. Since then, he has pursued collateral challenges and habeas-style filings, but courts have consistently rejected them. Reporting into late 2024 and 2025 has confirmed that Duggar remains incarcerated in federal custody, with his projected release date subject to recalculations by the Bureau of Prisons, but still years away. What do you think about the lawsuits that the Duggar got into? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.